And I'm going to first start by welcoming my good friend Anaru Timutimu up to give us a mihi whakatau and a karakia.
Papakitu ana ngā taiki mau au I whakanukunuku hia, I whakanekeneke hia, I whiuareretia e hotu a wahine rua ki te wai. Ki tai wiwi, ki tai wawa, ki te whai au, ki te ao marama a tihei Māori ora. Tuatahi he honore e krorea ki te atu e mau ngā rongo ki te whenua he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Tuarua, I te wā o Matariki, ki runga I te whetū o Pohutukawa, ngā mate kai rungi a koutou, ngā mate kai rungi a mātou, tātou katoa, haere, haere atu ki te pō. Nō reira, whatu ngaro te tangata toitu te whenua, anei tātou e tūtonu nei, ngā mihi kia koutou, e hui mai nei, ki konei, ki mauau, ki konei, ki te awa o tūkorako, ki konei, ki tauranga moana. Nō reira, tēnei te tauranga o ngā waka, tēnei te tauranga o ngā tangata, me te whakaruru hau o te kaupapa, te whakaruru hau o tā tātou kōrero I enei rā. Nō reira, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, nau mai, haramai, ki tēnei wāhi o Ngāti Kuku, o Ngai Tūkairangi, o Ngai Te Rangi, me Ngāti Rangi Nui hoki. Nō reira, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Kia ora everybody, just a few words of welcome from the locals here, the local hapu, which I'm part of, and welcoming you here to the symposium this year. And in particular to this place, most people know that the name of our mountain is Mauao, caught by the dawn, but also this area which is known as Te Awa or Tūkorako. So Te Awa means the river, and Tūkorako was one of our ancestors from many years ago. And it used to be a river that was situated along Hull Road. And our people that used to live down in Whareroa Marae, down past the Fert Works, used to come up here, and it was kind of their summer holiday. Over here at Te Awa o Tūkorako, where there was food, and there was obviously kind of fishing out in the harbour. So just a little bit of knowledge, local knowledge, but it's just really a warm welcome here to this place and here for the kaupapa, the symposium, and all that will be shared over the next 2 days. So just to start off, I'll just give us a little karakia, and it's going to be a really powerful one because it's going to last for 2 days, so I don't need to do it like tomorrow. So, menoi tātou, let us pray. Whakarongo e hine mā, e tamama, ko tahi te hiringa e kake ai a tāne ki te toi o ngā rangi. Ko te hiringa o te mahara, pupu ki te hihiri, pupu ki te mahara, pupu ki te wānanga nui o matua kore, tuturu o whiti whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, tā e ki e. Kia ora tātou.
He tangata ki tahi. Ko Rangiru te maunga, ko Kaituna te awa, no te puki a hau, ko David Tanner toku ingoa, ko ao te tai mana o te mana whakaheiri atoi te ora o ngā huakiwi. Nā mihi nui kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora ananu, thank you very much for your welcome. And for the karakia to welcome our guests and get us started on this, the first Biosecurity Symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, welcome, and thanks for attending. As I've said, my name's David Tanner, for those of you that don't know me, and for at least the next 2 weeks, I'm the chair of Kiwifruit Vine Health. And I'm going to be your MC for the next day and a half. And it is an absolute pleasure to take on this role. I'm a passionate biosecurity warrior, and I'm excited to get involved in the next couple of days. Today's activities around the incursion response event, and tomorrow to hear from a great lineup of speakers, panellists, and fellow warriors. So, before we get started, we better talk about our safety and to ensure, in the unlikely event of an emergency, we all get out of here in a timely fashion. I didn't check on what the exit plan is, but I've been here a few times, so I'm pretty sure I go back out the door, or the back door that you might not have come in, exit sign above it, down the stairs and out into the car park, far enough away from the building. Toilets out the door and around to your right and around, and you'll get into them. If you have the filthy habit of smoking, then I'm not sure where you go. You probably have to go halfway to Te Puke. Mobile phones. Those of you that know me know that I like really expensive red wine. So if anybody's phone goes off, you owe me a really expensive bottle of red wine. All right. So if you haven't turned it to silent mode, please do so now. A little shameless plug for the KVH director elections that are coming up. Because I'm standing down, there is a vacancy, and there are two fine ladies that are standing in that vacancy. One of them sends her apology today, Sandy Scarrow. Unfortunately, this morning she contracted COVID, and to save us all, she chose not to come, which is a good thing. But also in the room we have Liana White. Liana, do you want us to stand up? Where you are? There you are. Liana is also standing, so great to have people wanting to stand for the KVH board. Thank you to you both. Before we begin introducing the day ahead and the people that are going to take you through our incursion response event, I want to take an opportunity to thank and welcome our sponsors, without whom the day and that fantastic lunch wouldn't be possible. Sponsoring today and tomorrow are Plant and Food Research, Zespri, Onside, Biosecurity New Zealand, and New Zealand Kiwifruit Growers Incorporated. So thank you very much for your support of our event. It's appreciated, and we're delighted to have you all on board. So anybody from those organisations, please stand up while we give you a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. So let's get on to today's event, and we'll go through what we've got in store for you. We're going to kick off first with a capability development session. Many of you know that KiwiNet has been in place since 2014. They're our biosecurity champions, and they're part of our deployment model should we have an incursion. And we've held a number of KiwiNet events each year, try to have two, and we've had a biosecurity day in the past. This biosecurity symposium is planned to be an annual event that may take some of those events and wrap them up. Last year we held an exercise Hua Kiwi in partnership with Biosecurity New Zealand, and the main purpose of that exercise was to create familiarity with how a coordinated incident management system, or SIMS, and you may hear SIMS used a fair bit today, that's what it stands for, how that response would work. And the various roles and responsibilities, and we used Phytophthora in that exercise as the organism of interest. Today's event's going to be a little different. It's not a SIMS exercise. No previous experience is needed today, and we are here for an interactive session. It said on here, we're just here. No, we're here for an interactive session where everybody gets stuck in and contributes to the discussions. Pranoi? I told you I'd pick on you. The objectives are to explore how an organism may spread in an incursion and the importance of traceability data in supporting a response. And that's pretty cool because we've got Onside as a sponsor, and they're here, and they're going to actually help us a little later with understanding how their tool can capture some of that traceability information, and they're going to showcase some of that. So we're going to do this in two parts. Working through a response scenario with very limited traceability data, and then a second exercise, same scenario, but with the traceability data. So we'll run around like chooks with their heads cut off for a little while, and then somebody will tell us where the feed is. We acknowledge we've got support today with people from a range of organisations. So I've mentioned Onside, they're going to help us out here. Biosecurity New Zealand, and there's a number of their people in the room, and I'll introduce one of them to you in just a moment. And there's also KVH staff, and I have been remiss in welcoming Simon Cook, a KVH director and chair-elect when I step off the stage in a couple of weeks' time. So great to have you here, Simon, and good luck. So we're going to start with Finn Laberman from Biosecurity New Zealand, who will provide some context about how Biosecurity New Zealand and the Kiwifruit industry would work together in a response. And I have to say, Finn, having been involved in biosecurity response, how long ago now? 13 years ago. I think the relationship's come a long way. Looking forward to hearing your talk. Finn's the Relationships Manager, GIA Partnerships in Biosecurity New Zealand, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how we might work together.
Ahi ahi Mārie, everyone. Ko puki kaua te monga, ko tika pā moana te moana. No tamaki makaurua hau, ko Finn toku ingoa. Tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thanks everyone for having me here this afternoon, and thanks for that introduction, Dave. Nice to see you again. As you've just heard, my name is Finn, and I work in the Readiness and Response Directorate as a Relationship Manager under GIA Partnerships. I have the privilege of working alongside the team at KVH under GIA, the Government Industry Agreement. Before we get into the exercise we're going to be doing today, I'm here to give you a quick high-level overview of how KVH and BNZ would work together in a biosecurity response. You'll likely hear me use MPI and BNZ interchangeably throughout the next few slides. Please note, essentially, for the purposes of today, they are one and the same. MPI, of course, being our overarching government body, and Biosecurity New Zealand, or MPI, is the specific business unit I work in, and the one that would manage a biosecurity response alongside KVH. So just a quick little background about the Government Industry Agreement, or GIA. So it sets up the ability for Crown and industry to work together in partnership. And this allows us to tackle responses as a team. When not in response, it also, or in peacetime as we refer to it, it allows us to plan, prepare, and ensure industry readiness and preparedness for response. Ultimately, the main goal with this partnership is to achieve better biosecurity outcomes for the kiwifruit industry. And with that partnership comes a provision for us to jointly make decisions when it comes to readiness work and how we will respond. With that, of course, also comes the ability to jointly cost share this work. Okay, so blank slide, but don't worry, it's coming. What I want to do now is give you guys an idea of an overview of how a response generally would come to fruition. And I'll do that with this diagram I'm about to talk through. So, it starts with a call or the use of our new online notification form to our MPI Exotic Pests and Disease Hotline or call centre. Now, this call could come from literally anyone. You've got yourselves, industry, growers, research institutes, universities, vets, regional councils. Any man and his dog can call or use that online form to notify us if they think they've discovered something that is unusual or potentially a biosecurity risk. Now, that call or notification is then triaged by the call centre, who refer it to our FEL, or the Plant Health and Environment Laboratory, where our incursion investigators sit. Now, I'll start referring to the incursion investigators as IIs, just to throw another acronym in there for you. So they will then begin their investigation, which usually starts through making contact with their original notifier and hearing more about their report. Now, as you can imagine, That hotline can often be flooded with calls that turn out to be non-events, particularly when it comes to BMSB, and we have a native stink bug, the brown soldier bug, that looks the same. You can imagine a lot of incursion investigators end up not needing to do any work, which means they have lots of time to do the actual work. So one of the key questions an II has to ask or consider when they're investigating a report is whether or not the organism is actually a biosecurity threat. And you can imagine in the case of a brown soldier bug, it's going to be a straight no. Quite simply, if it's not, that process is then stopped. However, if the II discovers there is a threat there and it's a valid biosecurity risk, our Chief Technical Officer has to be informed, while simultaneously what we call a RAR, or a Rapid Assessment Report, is produced. This RAR is then scrutinised by our response team, who will then make a call about whether or not to mount a response to this new biosecurity threat. If a response is deemed to be required and approved, a governance group is then formed, who will then start to make some key decisions around how that response is going to proceed. Some of the key actions happening at this time are the appointing of a biosecurity provider, a controller being identified, and an IMT, or an incident management team, being stood up. There is then the development of a response brief, which will detail the outcomes and actions required to guide the response. And from there, the operation or field work can begin, and the response is live. Now, in a GIA response, that same process essentially is followed, with KVH and MPI working together in partnership. This diagram here is a slightly different view of that same flowchart, and you can see the initial report, the incursion investigators, the IIs, and then where KVH is informed with a heads up before we get to the RAR notification. This ensures everyone knows what's coming, and also means that when we have biosecurity threats reported that turn out to be of no risk, i.e. the brown soldier bug, KVH is privy to those as well. Depending on the type of response undertaken, it's also really important to remember that eradication isn't always our objective. Response governance has the responsibility to weigh up many different considerations when deciding to commit to a response, and that includes whether or not eradication is possible, or if it's perhaps more conducive to look to undertake surveillance, or in some instances it may require a move straight into long-term management. Essentially, every response will be different in this regard. So I've been talking about response governance a lot, so I thought I'd just give a quick overview of their responsibilities here. KVH would sit alongside BNZ in a response governance structure. Now, they're accountable for the strategic direction of the response objectives and outcomes, and as well as ensuring these remain appropriate. Some of their specific responsibilities are up here, but a quick overview of those is that they set those overarching response objectives, detail what resources are available, set any constraints, endorse a declaration, extension, or ending of a response, liaising with other levels of governance outside of the response, and of course endorsing any special funding arrangements. Now, you've also heard me talk of IMT, or Incident Management Team, which is a SIMS term that Dave was just referring to earlier. Now, I don't want us to get too caught up in SIMS, that's not what today is about, but I do just want to give a quick overview of what an IMT is and what it looks like. You can see here where the governance sits at the top of this hierarchy, with decisions around response direction and objectives coming from them and them only. Obviously, the decisions will naturally be influenced by policy, and there is a strong need to consider the strategic comms side in a response as well. All of this info is then fed down through our controller, who holds ultimate operational responsibility for the response. Under that controller, you then have a team, which can be scaled up or down, dependent on the size of the response. You can see some of the key functions here, and they're all represented by certain colours. They all have specific duties and responsibilities that together they carry out as part of the IMT. And where we'll likely be sort of operating in the scenario today is in the intelligence function. The intelligence function has very specific roles and responsibilities, but ultimately it all boils down to information, the collection of it, analysis of it, and dissemination of it. It provides situational awareness and understanding for immediate actions, and it forecasts and identifies emerging risks to assist the planning function. They tend to work through the application of the intelligence cycle here, and they're responsible for identifying and receiving the intelligence requirements of key decision makers, overseeing the collection of information, collating and managing that information, evaluating its reliability, processing it and preparing it for analysis, and producing and disseminating it to those decision makers who need to know. And that is just a really quick snapshot of how we would work together with KVH in a response. Have time for questions if anyone has any, and I have been joined by my colleagues down here if there's anything I can't answer. No?
Do you have a question? Put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you.
If something comes up as well later, we do have a parking lot you could pop questions up on. Cool. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thanks, Finn. Now that we've heard a high-level overview of how we're all going to work together in an incursion, we're going to delve into a little detail with a hypothetical scenario. The organism that we'll be using for today's exercise is Ceratocystis fimbriata, which is our pathogen of most significant concern to the kiwifruit industry. Don't worry if you don't know anything about this organism, because we're going to get Erin up here in just a moment to tell us all about it. Now, there's a man in the room that accompanied me on a wee excursion. How many years ago, Barry? Be 10 now, eh? Maybe 2014, 2013, something like that. We went to the far back blocks of Brazil to find an industry, and there's a little kiwifruit industry there way up in the hills, about, it's many hundreds of metres above sea level, that was struggling with their vines dying. They'd worked out that they had Ceratocystis fimbriata, but they had no idea at that stage what to do. Work forward 10 years' time, through the help of KVH, Zespri, and a lot of other people around the world, we've started to understand this disease a little more. So, without further ado and without stealing all their thunder, I'm going to ask Erin to come up. Erin's KVH's Senior Biosecurity Advisor. She's done a huge amount of work behind the scenes for KVH, scanning offshore to see what threats are out there and how we need to prepare for them. She's got a big weight on her shoulders. She's had a career in biosecurity, having previously worked for the Ministry for Primary Industries and their border clearance team for 7 years. So come on up and tell us all about our organism of interest.
Awesome, thanks Dave. I'm glad you acknowledged the huge weight on my shoulders. I appreciate that. So as Dave mentioned, we're going to go a little bit more granular. Finn gave a great overview of how we operate in a response, and I'm going to give a couple more details about the organism we're working on today, why it's a risk, and some details that might help you later in the exercise. So hopefully most of you, or some of you, have at least heard of Ceratocystis, and that's because it's sat on our most unwanted list since the beginning. As Dave mentioned, it's one of our top known biosecurity threats and probably the top pathogen biosecurity threat to the kiwifruit industry. So first reports of Brazilian growers dealing with this disease on orchard was in 2010, and this was, I guess, a really young industry at the time. They had decided they were going to invest in kiwifruit. They thought it was the next kind of lucrative crop for the region, so they had a lot of growers investing a lot of money to kick kiwifruit off. So it was quite devastating when they were having to manage this disease that was later identified, as Dave said, as Ceratocystis fimbriata. So over the following years, growers were reporting 20 to 40% vine loss, and some of those worst impacted growers were getting about 50% vine loss across 5 years. So it was a really significant threat to the industry, and it was quickly, without any known control options at the time, it was quickly becoming uneconomically viable to continue the the industry for some. So they just invested a lot of money, and so it was really devastating for these guys to have to deal with this. So Ceratocystis fimbriata, it's pretty complicated. It's actually a complex, so there's multiple types and strains that sit within it. Some of these are host-specific, so we, at this stage what we know is that the kiwifruit strain is likely specific to kiwifruit. It hasn't been impacting or known to be impacting any other hosts in Brazil where it's found, but there are other hosts, or there are other strains, sorry, that have a wide host range. And we do know that some of these could be detrimental to kiwifruit as well. So that really just tells us that we have to keep a wider picture on Ceratocystis and maybe not focus just on Brazil, but take that wider scope when we look at our preparedness. We've done some research, and we do know that G3, Hayward, Bounty and Bruno are susceptible to the Brazilian strain. And we know some of these other strains might be of concern as well. So if it does get here, the impacts could be significant. I mentioned earlier there are no control options once the vine has the disease. It has the disease, but eradication may be possible, and that's what we're going to look into today. But if we get it early enough and we can limit and contain that spread, it means we can preserve those control options and maybe hit it a little bit harder if we've managed to contain it. So I just want to quickly touch on this. So this is an article from 2020, so 10 years on from those first reports, and it just highlights that it's still a real big problem today in that region of Brazil. They've dropped their hectares that are cultivated by more than 50%. About 60% of the growers have dropped out of the industry. And the ones that have stuck it out are still reporting about 5 to 10% annual loss due to Ceratocystis. As well as loss of vines, they're getting loss of production. So the vines that are impacted also don't produce as well, and they're reporting kind of up to 50% production loss as well. So they're losing vines, and then they're losing some of their production. So it's quite a significant threat. So what does it look like? So wilting is usually the first symptom that's reported, and that's because Ceratocystis moves through the vine in the xylem. It's found there, and that means it clogs up those systems which move nutrients and water up to the canopy and help our vines grow. So when that's blocked, that means often the first symptom you see is those leaves wilting. What happens after wilting is pretty concerning. You get really rapid vine collapse. So there have been reports coming out of Brazil just a number of days after you see this first wilting symptom, you can get your vine collapse. Although it seems that more commonly a couple months from that first symptom you can get that full vine collapse. So it's quite rapid. You get these circular dead vines, or a circular death, and that's they're reporting that once a vine's infected, they're really quickly seeing that those ones adjacent to it are getting infected as well, and that's where you're getting kind of circle holes in the canopy where you're getting vines die around each other. I mentioned the browning of the xylem, so it lives in the xylem. Other organisms cause similar browning, but I guess a distinctive trait of Ceratocystis is it's a lot streakier. So it's not a solid browning, and it has quite a streaky picture to it. You can get, or there have been reports of some PSA-like spotting. However, all those other symptoms aren't really caused by PSA. So if you're seeing that spotting along with those other ones, then you'll quickly be able to tell that PSA is probably not your problem on orchard. And fruit shrivel, similar to leaves, if you get infection late stage in your canopy, that fruit's not getting the water and nutrients it needs, so it can shrivel. So quite distinctive characteristics and quite rapid decline, which should be of concern and get people reporting it in. So I thought I'll just touch on looking at how it might spread around New Zealand, and that's because one of the key questions you need to ask in the early stages once you've detected this organism is where is it, how far is it spread, and can we contain it? And so what's really integral to understanding that is understanding how it can spread and what pathways it can spread around the industry on. Both so that you can track and trace, but also you can put interventions on these pathways during that early stage to try and minimise that spread. So if we just quickly look between vines, so that's on an orchard, how does it spread? Unsurprisingly, tools and equipment. You're pruning vines as you go down, you've got a pruning gang going through. If they're not undertaking good tool hygiene, we've done some research and we know that if you have a tool infested or have Ceratocystis spores on it and you prune a healthy plant, that infection will go across. The good news is that it doesn't actually spread far on its own. So unlike PSA, it doesn't produce wind-borne spores. It's found in the soil and it's pretty well contained in the soil. So some of those natural mechanisms like root graft and water runoff, they won't take it very far. They'll take it within an orchard possibly, but it really is best spread by people. So that long distance spread that we really want to mitigate in a response, we can manage through us. So if we go look then at how it spreads between orchards and how it can spread between regions, those really important spread mechanisms, it's kind of the three same pathways that are of highest risk. So tools, again, not unsurprising. If you've got people moving orchard to orchard, doing contracting, pruning, etc., and then not doing tool hygiene, you can see how it could easily be carried across to other orchards, and similar in growing regions. Contaminated soil is a really high risk one, and we know it's soil borne. We know it can produce spores that can last in the soil for quite a long time. So if you have machinery, contractors, for example, running through your orchard, they collect contaminated soil on their tyres possibly, and they're moving orchard to orchard or region to region, that's another way. And then lastly, plant material, and this is probably one of the key ones, and that's because we move a lot of plant material around our industry. It's just the nature of how we operate, whether it's new developments, whether it's replanting, whether it's grafting over, we move just naturally a lot of plant material around. So, and we know it's found in the plant, it's found in the xylem, so if we're moving that around and it has Ceratocystis, the chances of that moving around are quite high. And Brazil is a great example of that. So the Brazilian growers wanted to understand where the pathogen came from. Was it an introduction? Did they get it from outside Brazil, or was it something that was already there? So they did some research looking at the genomes and all these technical things, but what they really found out was that it's probably indigenous to the region. It's a native organism, and it's really a case of you've planted a highly susceptible host in an area where the pathogen's found, and that's how infection occurred. But what was interesting is they did find that likely the spread throughout the region was due to a single farm that distributed plant material around to the other farms. This farm happened to be the first kind of major cultivator in the region, so people were going and asking, and so that movement of budwood and also kiwifruit plants and rootstock were kind of implicated in that spread of the disease. So what we could assume from that is that if they had good traceability records, if they understood that early and they knew how that spread was happening, they probably could have preserved some of the options they had in those early stages and maybe been able to manage it a little bit more for their industry. So last slide, it's been a bit doom and gloom, and I want to end on a high. So I just want to let you know that we are preparing for this. We're definitely not just sitting on our hands. And a lot of that preparation is through Zespri with our own research in kiwifruit, but we also do a lot alongside BNZ in this response area, and that's because we share responsibilities and decisions in these responses, and we want to make sure we're working from the same playbook, so when we make these decisions, we're making it with the same information. So to do that, we've created, it's called a threat-specific readiness manual for Ceratocystis affecting kiwifruit and kiwiberry, or a readiness manual. And what it does is it outlines everything we know about the organism, so a lot of the stuff I've covered today about where it is, how it gets here, how it gets around, our options that we might be able to undertake in a response. And this isn't super prescriptive because we know each incursion could be really specific and the scenarios can vary, so we outline options. And then lastly, knowledge gaps in research, so where we should undertake our research and what we don't know yet. And just to finish, is we did actually have a Ceratocystis expert over here last year for a conference, and we had a workshop with her and we shared our research and we shared our readiness manual, and she was really positive. She said we're as prepared probably as we can be at this stage for this organism. We should be really proud of where we are, and we're probably streaks ahead of a lot of other industries that are managing this disease at the moment. So the news is good. We're still preparing. There's still things we need to learn, but we're in a good place should it get here. So I'll just end on that, and that is me. Any questions, I guess?
a question on that readiness manual. How do you share that with your members, or is the intended audience the GIA partners that you work with?
Yeah, no, it is available, so we have it available on our website. It is a living document, so it is constantly evolving as we get new research and things. And so the primary audience is obviously decision makers in a response, but there's no, everyone being on the same page is always a benefit, and it's available publicly on our website for anyone who wants to have a read of all 80 pages.
Oh, thanks, it's a great idea.
Any further questions?
Bacteria? Sorry, I didn't even mention that. No, it's a fungus. It's a soil-borne fungi.
Is it in the soil microbiome? Is there a scientist been over there to see what the microbiome makeup is?
I don't, not from New Zealand, I don't believe we've had a close look. Matt, do you know, or? Sorry, I'll just relay Matt's because he doesn't have a mic. So it is present in the soil in other countries, so it will be found within the soil microbiome.
Pass your microphone.
How long does it take, so say, from a soil to affect the plant?
Great question. And that is one of our knowledge gaps in our readiness plan. We don't know exactly how long. It's something we're looking into. We're looking to see how long Ceratocystis takes to infect a plant. It could be up to years. So we are unsure, and it is something that would be really valuable to know in those early stages of a response, so we can understand potentially how long it's been here before we're starting to see impact. But yeah, it's a bit of an unknown.
Take one final one down the back.
Hi, is it a production issue, or is it also a export issue? Is it a phytosanitary pest, and can it be transferred on fruit? So would it have an impact there?
It's primarily a production issue. I don't believe it's transferred on fruit, and I think we've looked and there's no Ceratocystis market access implications on fruit. Plants, if you move plants around, that's a bit different, but that's to my knowledge. I don't believe it's a fruit-borne pathogen. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. I think a bit scary, huh? We wouldn't want this here. Your question about how long will it take to infect, I wouldn't mind betting that if your plants are under a lot of stress, it'll be a shorter period of time than if you've got a really healthy plant and soil. So do you want to add that into the little bit of unknown mix that we've got? Sounds like 2010 to me a little bit, and many similarities between PSA and this fungus. Right, on that cheery note, I'm going to pass over to Matt Dick. Matt's going to come up and introduce John Brightwell and Mike Lawson, and you've already met Finn and the team, who are going to together explain today's activity. So over to you, Matt.
All right, good morning. So first of all, just a quick bit of administration. We have some table leads scattered throughout the room, but you may not be evenly distributed. So please put your hand up if you know you're a table lead. Okay, perfect. If you've got more than one at a table, you'll just need to spread yourselves out, please, and make sure that each table has a table lead. Erin's going to come round with a pack. And an information pack. Don't need to get into these yet. John's going to explain what to do, but I'll just give you a quick moment. So if Amy moving down the back, you guys got yourself sorted too? Yep. No? Yeah, so which table? Okay, so stand up if you're a table lead, please. Okay. Perfect. We've got Gordon moving. Does any table, you don't have one at the back, Max? Okay, we'll sort one out for your table. Got a couple capable people at your table, so it should be all sorted. Okay, So Aaron's handing out an information pack. You don't need to look at this yet, and we'll get underway. So I just want to introduce John Brightwell. We're very fortunate to have, for a hypothetical scenario, we have a real response manager. So John's a response manager at Biosecurity New Zealand. He is currently a controller on a response. So to get him from a response to our scenario for the exercise today is brilliant. So thank you very much, John. And we also have Mike Lawson, who's arrived with John as well, who's manager in the GIA partnerships team. So I'm going to hand over to John to explain what we're going to do and introduce the scenario. Over to you, John.
Afternoon, everybody. Just 1 second while I get my admin here sorted. So I am going to be the controller for this particular exercise. I am a response manager at Biosecurity New Zealand, and my job is to actually run responses. So what I'm going to do is, can I get this thing? Oh, there we go. Right, so what I'm going to do is go through what is a briefing on what the situation is and then what we are going to ask you people to do. Okay, so I'm going to follow roughly the GSMEAC template for those of you who have ex-forces or CDM, very loosely, and I thought we'd just kick into it now. Okay, so on the screen here you can see the SITREP put out. There will be copies on your desk as well. I'm going to go through. So what we're dealing with is a kiwifruit orchard on Benner Road, Te Puke. Bay of Plenty has vines exhibiting symptoms of Ceratocystis fimbriata. This orchard is 14.95 hectares. Just quickly looking to make sure I've got the right numbers. That looks about right. You would not believe how many times that happens in a real response. The block showing symptoms is 1.35 hectares. Okay, that infected block grafted in June 2022, so there's been some time since it's been there. All plants were sourced from a single nursery from the region. Right, so the situation. KVH collected a sample from the kiwifruit orchard on the 24th of July and submitted samples to PHEL, or Plant Health and Environment Laboratory. That's a BNZ MPI laboratory in Mount Albert, Wellington. I've forgotten where it is now. Tamaki, that's where it is. You can tell I'm based in Wellington. The PHEL has tentatively identified Ceratocystis fimbriata on August the 4th. The grower has been asked to restrict movements of goods on or off the orchard. Notice direction has been issued to enforce that request. Okay, so we can be confident, if everybody's playing by the rules, that nothing's going on off that block as of the 7th. Confirmed on the 8th of August, a joint MPI KVH response has been stood up and first governance meeting has been held. So the mission for this group today is to work their way through objective 1, which is to determine the extent of the organism spread within the kiwifruit orchards in the Bay of Plenty. Okay, we're going to concentrate on that one and that one only. Right, execution. So you're going to be working at your tables, and the object is to develop an understanding of what is needed to undertake forward and back tracing. Let's go there. So what do we need? How are we going to do it? Who is going to do that work? Very important. And what resourcing requirements are the response going to need to actually achieve the tracing? Okay. At some stage, someone's going to call time, and the various designated people will report back your findings, the insights, and the understandings that you've come up with. So what I would like you to do, and I've got that here down the bottom, is the what, who, how, and how we're going to get it done. Just think about what is the information that we require to understand the situation, okay? That's actually a very good and actually surprisingly difficult thing to nail down sometimes, okay? How can we acquire that information? Okay, so as a BNZ response manager, I don't have an army in a cupboard ready to deploy. So how are we going to get that achieved? What inference and facts can we make or understand if we had that information? There has to be a purpose for what we're trying to come up with. And what confidence do you have in them meeting the objectives? From what you have come up with, do you have any confidence that you can actually meet that objective one, which is understand the situation? Right, so we have an organism overview. You have collateral and stuff on your table to help you work through. And there will be experts, apparently on one of them, who will be floating around the table just to answer any questions. Yep. Yep.
Sorry,
Well, before we go, yeah.
Sorry. My question was going to be just in making sure everyone's on the right page. Just a quick, what is trace back? What is trace forward? Why is it important?
Okay. Yes, I probably should have covered that off at the beginning. Right, trace forward, trace back. So if you want to know where something came from or has gone to, and you have point zero, so in this particular case it is Benner Road to Puki. You need to start from there and you need to trace risk goods. Risk goods being things that Erin mentioned before. So tools, equipment, plant material and soil. You need to trace that going forward from that property so you can get in front of the invasion curve. You also need to trace back from that property to try and find the source so you can stop continuing spread. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so what we're trying to do is work out where we need to look to find this organism to give us some confidence that we know in the Greater Bay of Plenty area where it is. We good? Yep. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, John. So you'll see at your tables you've got some paper, and on the paper is each one of those questions. So have a discussion, work through it, have a look, what do we need to know? And as you're capturing what do we need to know, capture at the bottom half of the page what some of the challenges are that you're experiencing in going through that process. Okay, and your table leads can guide. We have until about 40 minutes for this exercise. Sounds like a lot of good discussion in the room, which is always good to see. So what we're going to do now is, John and I will just kind of tag team here a bit and get some anecdotes from each of the tables and get a bit of a report back. We won't be able to go around, we've got a lot of tables, we've got a lot of people in the room, so we won't be able to go around every table and hear what you had for each answer. What we'll do is we'll choose a table to kick off each section, and then if you've got something further to add to the discussion, put up your hand and let's hear it by all means. So, question one, what do we need to know? And some of the challenges that came up there. Amy, do you want to kick off for us, please, for that one?
Okay. So, very fortunate on the table that I was on. Oh, thank you. That we had Dave Tanner and Barry O'Neill, who had gone through the PSA scenario before, unfortunately. But it did provide some very good insights for this. So, basically what do we need to know? How long had the grower seen the symptoms? It may have actually been around for quite a while, maybe thinking it was PSA. Grafting 2022, where did this graftwood come from? Who were the grafting contractors? And in general, who were any contractors that came on? And had any plants been replaced? Have the neighbours seen any symptoms? What tests are available? And leading back into the contractors there, what were the hygiene protocols? We just also need to be thinking, both before and after. So in terms of contractor movement, it's a case of where were they before, but where had they gone afterwards? And we did sort of find that we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole and kept on talking about where they'd gone to from that orchard. But you do need to think that, and we did actually write that as one of our challenges, is you can't make the assumption that this was to actually have this. The overseas movements of people on orchards, so we might have found potentially that one of the workers had just been over to Brazil and had fruits properly. So yeah, just covering all those bases. The source of plant material, including compost, and where it's gone to, and what other orchards do these growers or employees go and visit. Obviously, a number of challenges that we have listed, but it won't be all of them, is can you have any confidence in the grower's ability on what is happening? And what we kind of meant by that is, we're finding that there's a lot of syndicated orchards obviously starting to come through, and the grower or the owner may not actually necessarily have the answers. It's looking at the orchard manager, the orchard employees, and who's there. So yeah, again, it's just looking at that traceability of any contractors, and a big one that actually came out from the PSA days, which was of interest that I found anyway, was the testing time, capability and capacity. So it apparently with PSA it took quite a number of days, if not weeks, to actually get a result, so that could impact things significantly.
Brilliant, thanks Amy. John, any comments on what you're hearing there as a response manager?
Yeah, pretty happy with that. So there was a concentration on people and equipment movement, which is probably the right way to go at the beginning. I like the idea about overseas people coming in. And the thing that I really took away from that was, don't assume that's ground zero. And that's something that we always fall into, is we go, oh, it's here, that must have been here first. So the Kalupa, the seaweed incursion that we have up in Hauraki Gulf and far north, we thought that Altair was ground zero. It turns out that it was actually way up the far north. So we kind of got trapped into thinking that we knew what we were dealing with, and it wasn't. Yeah, so there's other ones there. So that's a very important point. The other thing I was going to say is June 2022. So that's, sometimes you think, oh, the graft wood came in there. It's the graft wood was the risk of coming in. So you forget to think about pre-June 2022. So it's quite nice that you guys were thinking about the workers coming on, the grafters coming on, where had they gone, but then you mentioned where had they been, and I think that's a very important point too. And again, that's something that in the heat of the moment you kind of forget. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thanks John. Any other groups want something to add something on question 1? What do we need to know? Brilliant, thanks Erin.
No problem. So what do we need to know? It was covered pretty much by that group, tracing forwards and backwards and spread within the vicinity. But some of the challenges we had was how much actual information we need to capture in the various forms that it may come in, and the quality of that data as well. So, you know, the real challenge around how much people are capturing and how granular it is, and then also the different forms in which people might decide to keep those records, whether it's paper, you know, it might be verbal conversations, and trying to capture that into kind of a succinct piece. And just to touch on their point as well, we had a real challenge around ownership. So when you have orchards that are managed, or you know, they have management companies that work, who owns the traceability for that orchard? Is it assumed and then it's lost? Or is it really clear from the outset that either the grower or the management company own it? So I think there's a real challenge if it's assumed and it's not happening, then we could lose a lot of that data.
Thanks, Erin.
So one of the things I keep saying is that, you know, we say, what do we need to know? But really important is to understand what is the question we're trying to answer. And so I always go back to the objective. which again is something that often gets lost in the middle of a response, especially when it's very hectic. So what's the question you're trying to answer? Always keep referring back to that when you're formulating your plans.
Brilliant, thanks. Any other volunteers? Question 1? Oh yes, Linda. Just wait for the microphone, sorry. It's so we can capture it on the AV.
The budwood was covered by the previous group, but because we were listening so well to your earlier story, we obviously wanted to follow up on the nurseries too, because it might have showed up after the budwood was placed, but it could have come in on nursery plants. So then we'd be hunting backwards to the nursery, get from the dispatch record, which we had filed in the right place, and then we'd want to notify the nursery, because the nursery might have other batches of plants elsewhere. And, you know, they might not be in Te Puke either, they might be almost anywhere, so we need to get that going. One of the challenges is quite often the key people end up in Bali or somewhere like that when you really need to know them, where they are. So it's just trying to sift through where will I get that accurate data.
Sounds like you've been on a response before.
Thanks, Linda. And did I see a hand at the back? Sean, I think. No, we'll use the microphones, thank you.
I may have missed it. Delimiting surveys. I mean, when you do the trace forward, you trace back, especially with the nursery stock, looking at what's happened, where that may have gone, delimiting surveys and other orchards, and just a real life challenge. As soon as you start doing trace forwards and trace backs, the numbers start getting big very quickly, and having enough people with the right qualifications or authorisations to actually do that work starts getting difficult quickly.
Absolutely true. I think, well, in the readiness plan there is a delimiting plan in there, which seems pretty solid. So I guess we would be, as the response would be kicking that off anyway, and you can think of this trace forward, trace back as the cream on the top of that. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, John. So we can see already there's quite a few different pathways that need to be explored. So you can see John's job is can be quite full on, I imagine, in some of these big responses. So if we move to question 2, who do we need to get involved? Who wants to kick that one off? Not looking at anyone in particular, Sonia. Thanks for volunteering. All right, you can do more than one. It's fine.
So we sort of started off our list of who to get. It's okay. I've folded this one. Who do we need to get involved, and pretty much filled up half the page with a list of potential people, and it reflects the complexity of our industry. That who as a grower is a very diverse and complex sort of situation. So we actually ended up with quite a list of people, and there's things like the key decision maker, the actual owner property, a property owner, whole long list of things. And then so for us the challenge becomes around those key contacts, and we hadn't even thought about them being in Bali, Linda, so thanks for that heads up. That then goes into, and I might be biased, my title's Global Trials and Data Insights Manager, that then goes into some challenges around the diversity of people's approaches to record keeping. Some people are kind of, unlike me, quite technology based and everything's, you know, in an electronic format versus paper. And then you get questions around how accurate that data is and the ability to interrogate that. And all of that's going to slow us down and take lots of time. So that's the big challenge here with that area. Short and sweet, Matt.
Perfect. Thanks, Sonia. Oh, John.
Cool. I just wanted to ask, so we've got a list of people that we want, or we need to get involved. So how many of them are going to be people who may be on the impact side of this event, and how many might be on the I can make some money, as in I'm doing a job side? Because it's just have a think about when one of my guys rocks up to a response manager, orchard manager, and goes, "Hi, I'm from MPI. I've come to ask you some questions," how they might feel. So you have to, so one of those things that we've learnt to be conscious, especially after Mycoplasma bovis, that when we rock up and ask what we think are just standard questions, the reactions can be quite sharp. So, and I noticed also that there's huge lists I saw of people who can be involved. Just remember, the longer the list, the more complex it is going to reach them, get them going, and then manage them. So you can end up with a huge team just to manage the people out in the field. You guys are probably better at that than I am. So.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Others to add to this one? Yes, over here.
Yeah, so I might be biased as well as a grower services rep, but I think it's really important that when a grower is going to be approached with potentially devastating news, like what this could be, it could be really pertinent to get someone involved, like their rep who is used to dealing with them regularly, and just helping deliver that news in a way that will understand that grower maybe a bit better than one of your guys, and we can kind of help tailor that to best fit that grower so they don't freak out.
Yeah. So the other thing I was just going to mention, because this has happened to me on responses before, is that when the news breaks that this disease is now rampaging, or according to the media, rampaging through Te Puke, how hard do you think it's going to be to actually find someone to answer their cell phone on one of those orchards? Because they are going to be busy, because they're going to be out looking, and they're going to be panicking. They haven't got time to take a phone call from a random number. So you can see how things can start to slow down as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent, John. Yeah. Great shout out to grower welfare. That's number one. We had it fairly high on ours. The other one is media strategist. One of the things that we worked out in PSA was actually you have to sit calm for a little bit and work out your strategy, and especially if it's an export industry like ours, we don't want to spook the horses everywhere. You've got to have the answers if the customers come back. So having a media strategist in these things is bloody important.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Any others for question 2? Brad.
Thank you. It just sort of follows on from that around, you're right that people within the response are going to be full up, not taking phone calls, but we discussed that this is a high activity period for the kiwifruit industry anyway, with pruning and other activities, and looking forward around productivity and what growers who need to be interviewed or otherwise, they're engaged in other activities as well, so it's just understanding that.
I just had a thought about some of the unknowns that we don't have the information on around the disease and its impact. So setting up perhaps a high-level group of scientific experts or a technical advisory group, that always takes ages to do, so getting it started fast is probably quite important.
I should ask you, Ed, because you've been in this situation before, but we can usually find the right people around the world. How hard is it to manage people when you've got people scattered across the world, different time zones, different languages sometimes? Not easy, is it? No, so, and you're quite right that scientists like to be deliberate and process-driven, and by the time you get the answer, this is either already well past anything that they can help with, or everybody's lost interest. So you end up with this really massive and beautiful report that is no longer fit for purpose because we didn't get it in a timely fashion. So I guess for something like this, we would be relying on our own incursion investigators, our own plant pathologists that we have in our organisation in the first instance, and you guys, and I guess we'd be looking internally. So really heartened that you guys are doing so much work on this disease at the moment, because in that initial rush, and when people want answers and we don't have them, and then we sit there and go, what are we going to tell the public? Yeah, so it's worth investing in the knowledge here. Thanks.
Cool, thanks. Okay, let's move to question 3. How do we get this information? Who's our lucky volunteer? Simon, are you volunteering? Yep, perfect, thank you.
The main one we said was interviews. So you're going to have to talk to 1,000 people, whether it's through delimiting or talking to other growers, going out and doing surveys. you're going to need an army of people to carry out those interviews. In terms of getting information off them as well, things like invoices, for the grower in particular in this case, going through all his invoices, because that's probably your best record of who's been on that orchard in the last 2 years, in terms of contractors, etc., because everyone that goes on that orchard is probably going to send you a bill for their time for coming on the orchard. So that's probably the best place to start.
Cool. And did you think of some challenges associated with that process?
Just the labour requirement for doing that interviewing. As you talked about, once you get into that delimiting survey and trying to do trace forward and trace back, just as you start going down rabbit holes, you talk about the nursery, where it came from. Where did it get to the nursery? Was it the plant media that the nursery had brought in? So once you start drilling through all those levels, and that could be a complete red herring, it might have been the contractor that had done the grafting had been on an orchard before, and that's how it had got to that orchard, was the grafter, not the nursery itself. And each time you go down one of those rabbit holes, it's just the time to go all the way down that hole and come out again is just a huge requirement on staffing.
Cool. Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Brad.
Yeah, we got the manual requirement to collect data. We also looked across the KPCS records and pest management plan movement records that the industry already holds, obviously health and safety records. But our major list, I guess, was challenges, the labour-intensive and slow nature of collecting that information, not understanding how big that situation is, incomplete records, voluntary compliance to those, multiple systems at use. Non-standardised data was a big one when you're trying to compile that bigger situation. And I guess that very localised view that you're getting with that slow approach to manual data and risk not understanding that wider situation, non-integrated systems, and just the volume of data that you'd be dealing with. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brad. Sonia.
It was touched on a little bit under who, but one of the things that my team raised was, wouldn't it be great if we could do like a mass publicity campaign around, we've found this thing here. If you've had any association with this site, can you please get in touch with us? But then you have to reflect on privacy concerns and how that's going to make the person involved. So one of the challenges we kind of highlighted is, how do you kind of balance that, the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, and protecting the few individuals at the start involved versus the good of a quick response and getting that information quickly. And I don't know, John, if you've got any thoughts on that, we'd be curious to hear about it.
Yes, so we'll often, and going back to when do you go public, usually when we go public is when we want to mobilise the public. So yes, we would be doing that. You might, if we were very ambitious, say, if you've been to this area, please call us and we would like to get information. What's the response that you're likely to get to that? How many people do you think you might get calling in? Because usually for some of those things, the percentage of people that actually follow the instructions is usually small. So, but it does raise awareness. So, yeah. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I'm just saying we can't rely on it, but it might be a good way of getting the public to know what's going on.
Yeah, Matt, one of the challenges we discussed in our group in this area is a lot of interviews have to happen, so the growers or orchard managers or workers have to be interviewed as to what's happened. Whoever's doing that interview, if they have a knowledge of kiwifruit and a knowledge of the kiwifruit industry, is more likely to get answers that are relevant than if it's someone that doesn't understand kiwifruit. So no disrespect to John and the MPI team, but somehow I think we need to get into the system in this situation, people that do understand what growing and what kiwifruit and what movements are likely to happen, to ask the questions that otherwise might go missing in the system.
Thanks, Barry. So yeah, we need a lot of people to do these interviews, but they also have to be the right people. So we're hearing quite a demanding exercise. So Shane, did you have one down at the back as well?
I mean, one of my learnings from Pierre's days on this, it's been brought up a couple of times, having someone that can relate to growers is absolutely key. don't assume that growers' memories are what they say they are. I mean, we went, didn't we, Dave? We went through red herrings to start with. We thought we had good science, we didn't, which created all that delimiting work to be a massive red herring. But people will lie. People, if they feel that they are the person that brought it to New Zealand, or don't want to be associated, I thought that's where your comment was coming from. I mean, they start to believe things that aren't real. And so being able to triangulate facts is so important because you go chasing bloody red herrings again. Yeah, so there's a bit of human psychology in there.
Thanks, Shane. So last one, Viv.
I was just going to say about languages, so language barriers and having translators involved. I came across that with Myrtle Rust response work in Te Puke. So that's another consideration.
Perfect, thank you.
I thought I'd just ask, because I'm sure someone out there can do mathematics in their brain pretty quickly, but I was just thinking, so number of orchards in, say, Te Puke, team of 2 to go and visit each one of them, probably can visit 3 orchards in a day because of biosecurity going on, off, collecting and then things. How many teams do we need to try and get through all of them in, say, a week or a month? Right, yes. So we mentioned about resourcing constraints, and this is one of the things that we keep running into is that, and then you've got the problem on top is you've mentioned that they don't know, their records have been shoddy or they're panicking, they're not telling you the entire truth. So you can see it becomes a real, So we take the information for the forward trace backs. We are always looking to try and confirm them because we've been burnt a number of times by going off in the wrong direction. I think as some of you have mentioned in previous responses.
Cool, thank you. I'll move to our last question. So where do we start? What are the top priorities? Who wants to kick off here?
Oh yeah, our table can kick that one off.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, so where our table thought would be a good place to start with prioritising would be our tracing, first and foremost, in combination with a delimiting survey and also stopping movement. So all these 3 things happening at once and prioritising those results. That way it would inform our goal of the response. Is it still feasible to eradicate? Are we containing? What are we doing next? So that's our main, they were our main points there. As well as really high on the list there with our priorities was keeping the growers in the loop with what's happening while all of this is playing out. So our challenges, which have been spoken about throughout the room, we're happy we're on the same page as everyone else, is the accuracy of all of our information while doing this. You're making some big calls. We really want to get this information in a timely manner so we can get in front of that invasion curve if it's possible. And then also in the background planning, right now it's in Te Puke. Is this going to be in Gisborne, South Island, and being able to upscale quickly if we need to? So yeah, that's us.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Any other comments on priorities? Where to start? Anything else to add there? Sonia?
So one of the points in the question is timeliness, and so we were trying to time bound our trace back, trace forward, so that we were most effective and efficient with our limited resources. And one of the key things that's come out for us today is our lack of knowledge between ceratocystis being present in an orchard and symptoms being visible, which is probably also influenced by time of the year. So as someone who was really close to the biosecurity science portfolio in a previous life, I'd make a plea that that comes up as something that we try and unpack so we can direct the efforts of our limited resource.
Great point. Thanks, Sonia. Sue.
Just probably from experience from PSA is that, one of our main things here in the response was actually the nursery and the budwood. So probably just putting a halt on movements for those 2 things pretty quickly, because in PSA days it took probably a little bit longer than it should have.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. So I'm going to leave it there because I have let my timekeeping slip away on me a little bit and afternoon tea is waiting. But I mean, some of the themes that we're hearing, which I'm sure are familiar with what you experience in many responses, John, is this volume of work and the amount of information, the amount of labour, some of the inaccuracies, human nature creeping in. Any other final comments before we break for afternoon tea, John?
No, I think that's good.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, hopefully you found that a useful exercise. We're going to go into part 2 after a short afternoon tea break. So 15 minutes, and we'll start back at 3 o'clock. Thanks.
We have to keep knocking everything off, eh?
Yeah, good, because so you're saying, was it the bubble, was it the floor, was it the plant?
That was a great discussion, and it's set the scene really nicely for this second exercise. This time it's going to be a similar situation, but we're actually going to have some traceability data to work with. So one of the good things I'll just mention here is that as Kiwifruit industry, we do have a National Kiwifruit Pathway Management Plan in place under the Biosecurity Act. And this is really good because it does make keeping traceability data mandatory for the movement of these risk goods like budwood, rootstock, pollen, etc. So that means that when we do come to tracing, this information should be in place, and then it's a case of how do we make it so that it's easily accessible and accurate. So when we were consulting on the pathway plan with the industry, one of the key commitments we made in going around the regions and discussing with growers and members of the industry is that we would look for technology to help make this compliance, if you like, easier, so that we're not adding additional challenges to the industry. So one of the tools that we've been working with is Onside, as a digital tool to help capture this traceability information. And I'll hand over to Ryan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Onside, to introduce what it is their organisation does. Thanks, Ryan.
Hi, this one? Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's awesome to be here. This is actually the second simulation exercise that we've done in this sort of environment. We did our first one over in New South Wales just a couple of months ago, so we have practiced. I'll give you guys just a quick bit of a background around Onside, who we are, and then I'll just talk you through at a high level how the technology works, and then through the exercise we'll obviously go through in a lot more detail, and there'll be plenty of time to ask questions. But just about the company, we're a New Zealand-based agri-tech company. We're owned, 100% owned by Kiwis. Actually, there's a lot of roots in terms of our investor base into the kiwifruit sector. One of our big investors is actually a guy who founded compact fruit sorting. I see the compact machines in many of the pack houses here. So we've got Hamish as an investor, and then also Stephen Tyndall's funds invested in us. So definitely Kiwi roots, and definitely a lot of agri-tech in our team. So in terms of how the software works, what I'll go through is how the data is collected, and then some of the insights that it can provide, particularly for the traceability side of things, but then also there was a lot of discussion around how do you prioritise tracing, or how do you do delimit in a response. And so there's some things that some technology we've been working on to support some of that sort of stuff as well. So I'll just give a high level view of how that might work. So in terms of data collection, so the data is collected via our digital check-in app. So when you come to an orchard, you check in. This is what supports the plant pathway plan from a digital standpoint as well. So if you might be bringing plant material, a little pop-up will pop up when you're checking in, and you can record what you might be bringing to the property. And so that data goes into our data warehouse, and so it's stored for as long as we've got the record. And then it goes into our other software called Onside Intelligence, which is what we've worked with the KVH team on to design and develop. So the way, there's a couple of things that are important to note here. So the app, the data comes in via the app. There's a data sharing agreement and a privacy framework and a whole lot of terms and conditions that surround this. And so growers have to give permission for the data to actually go into the data warehouse. So there's a legal framework around that, and so we won't put the data into the data warehouse unless the grower has checked that box. And so that's the data that's available to KVH, and we have the terms and agreements with KVH as well, so only KVH can see that information that's been provided if the grower has decided to do that. So that's how, there's quite a lot of privacy and legal structure around that to make that all to make that work. So that goes through into the digital pathway mapping system, which we'll show this afternoon as part of the exercise. And so what that does is allows for tracing forward and back from any orchard that's part of the program or is an Onside. And so yeah, you can see that's a map of the Bay of Plenty. And what we see with tracing is that all agri sectors are extremely connected. There's an enormous amount of movements around the sector, and this is pretty typical in every sector that we work with, whether it be kiwifruit or viticulture or livestock sectors. Everything's always extremely connected. So that that's the challenge around tracing. So some of the other technology that we've been working on is around how can we support the folks like John around prioritising tracing. So if you look at this is a network or a simple example of a network, and so in this diagram, the circles would be an orchard, and then the lines would be a movement between the orchards. So whether it be a person or a vehicle or some plant material that's been recorded. So circles are the orchards and then the connections. And so if you imagine that the red orchard or circle is a property where something's been found, then the question becomes like, where do you go and trace, which is the previous discussion we've just had for the last hour or so. And so if you understand the network and you understand how everything's connected, there's some really interesting things you can do with mathematics to try and help support decision making in terms of how you prioritise resource. Because one of the things we heard was like resource is going to be super, super tight. Like there's only a handful of people and it can take a lot of resource to understand where all the movement's got to come from. And so on the right-hand side, or your right, you can see that a connection from that red property, there's just a handful of properties that are connected, directly connected. And if you look on the left-hand side, you can see that there's a whole bunch more. And so if you were going to prioritise testing, you'd go to the left-hand property. And so in big networks that are highly connected, this is an extremely complicated problem, but you can pull out these insights pretty effectively with mathematics. And so we've got a whole lot of algorithms that sit over top of the network to help understand some of these insights in terms of how you might prioritise testing. So this is some of the R&D that we're working on at the moment. Similarly, if before a response, if you're just working on readiness, then you can use similar algorithms, slightly different, but you can identify properties that play this connecting role in a network, and they're the best properties to put readiness monitoring before you've actually identified a disease. And so like a good example of how the intuition would work is if you consider New Zealand, you've got the North Island and the South Island and how they're connected. If it's freight, everything's going to go through Picton. So it's going to go across the ferries into Picton, or Wellington obviously. I'm based in the South Island, so I was thinking Picton. And so that's going to be the big connection hub. And so that's a bridge between the two networks. And so the intuition's similar. You can figure out who those bridge properties are in a network. And so those are the best properties to put readiness. And typically in networks, like if you look at all the science and the literature, there's only a very small number of properties that play that role. And if you can identify them, that can reduce the risk of like network widespread by up to 90%. So you can figure that stuff out again with mathematics. And so an analogy, it's a bit like the canary in the coal mine. And so it can dramatically reduce the resource required to detect things early. So that's some of the stuff that we've got on the go. The team that work at Onside on the science side of things is myself. We've got a guy over in Indiana University, Professor Fortunato. He is one of the world's best network guys. And so we Onside funds a PhD student up there to like work on our algorithms. We've got a guy, Hotahi. He's actually a scientist at YouTube during the day in New York and does our data science by night for Onside. And then we've also got Mary Van Andel, who's New Zealand's chief veterinary officer, there to advise us. So a lot of the science program is funded by Onside, but then also through a government grant called an SFFF grant. And so the purpose of that grant was to, to support the scaling up of this technology and rolling it out. So we've been working on that program for a couple of years, and I think this is where the KVH team got involved. So this is this technology is being built in collaboration with the team. The Kiwifruit sector is the first sector we've done this with. I think this is probably a world's first, actually. If you look around the world, I'm not sure anyone else doing this. So it's super awesome to be working with the KVH team on this as we, work on developing this technology to support, these biosecurity in these important sectors. So happy to take any questions. Just acknowledge we've got a few of our team here. So Ben's here down the back. He leads our customer team. Guy's here who's he's gonna help with the simulation, and then Lucy's here as well from our team. So there's 4 of us floating around. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. All right, so we're going to go through this exercise. We will have a panel discussion at the end, so if you do have questions for Ryan, John, KVH, or others, there'll be that opportunity as well. So what we're going to do now is Guy from the Onside team is going to show us how some of this data might be used and how this tool might be able to support a response, and guide John and I through. John will still be the controller, and he might have some questions as we go, and I can kind of act as a bit of an interface too. We'll see how it all works out. So we'll just get this all sorted. So this is a bit of an opportunity to see this technology. It is available out there on the app, so if you are using it, please do check it out. And over to you, Guy.
So, it was really interesting going through that manual exercise with everyone. As Ryan said, we actually did a similar thing in New South Wales recently, and the similar themes keep coming up. It's about resources, it's about cost, it's about accuracy and timeliness of data. So these are a lot of the issues that we're trying to solve, or at least make it more efficient, by having a lot of this data collected passively as people come and go from orchards, farms, vineyards every day through a tool that's operationally useful for people on the ground. So we have an Onside app that I think many of you would have used in the past or currently use on your orchards, and that sort of movement between orchards, whether it be people, machinery, plant material, is being captured every day, and then, as Ryan said, there's this opt-in mechanism to be able to share that with the industry level, to be able to see how things move across the whole industry or across multiple industries, so that we can be more efficient with our preparedness and response. So this is the dashboard that it ends up surfacing to at an industry level. And the way that you'd use it in a response like this one is we put that same property here into the property of interest, so it's either an infected premise or a property of interest. You select what type of movements you want to be looking at, whether that be people movement, plant material movement. In New South Wales, we put trackers on grape bins as well, so you could passively monitor that. You can essentially input any movement data that makes sense into here and be able to drill down into those different types of movements, depending on what the pest or disease is. You put in the time frame you want to look at movements over. So, for this scenario, we're looking back till June 2022. And then you can choose the duration between movements, depending on how long that organism or pest or something can survive between hosts. So, whether it be 1 week between a movement from one orchard to another, or 1 day or 1 hour, or anything in between or above. So this is the trace with live data running from this K-pin over that time period from June last year. So straight away we get 37 total movements across 30 properties, and so that gives us a way of prioritising instantly where we want to start with our response efforts. And so you can start with just going, we want to know trace back, trace forward. So you can see on this side here, green is trace forwards, what movements have come out of that orchard in that time frame. Blue is trace back, what movements went into the orchard in that time frame. As was identified before, it's important to know it might have come from somewhere else, so being able to look back and see that. And straight away what you can see is just with that time frame with one orchard, you don't just have movements within the Tauranga or Te Puke area, it's going all the way out to Portiki and even down to Gisborne. So you might want to start with those outliers to make sure they're not showing any signs, because it could have got way out of that region already and you want to get in front of that curve as we've talked about. What you can do from here is that you can actually say, okay, well this is direct movements in and out of the property, but what movements went in and out of those properties within those parameters, and start to step it out that way. So if we go from one step, which is direct movements in and out, to 2 steps, which is what movements went in and out of those properties within these parameters, it scales up pretty quickly. So we start with 30 properties, you're now looking at 336 properties and over 2,000 movements. So you can see how tracing just gets kind of out of hand pretty quickly, and it's hard to, as we identified in that manual process, the people, the timeliness, the where do you start, how do you prioritise the cost of it all, that's where it starts to get pretty hard to manage. And so what we're able to do with this technology, and why KVH has got that mandate to track plant material movement, because you want to drill down to the priority risk vectors to begin with, so you can have somewhere to start and try and rule those out first. So we could do that here. We could say, okay, we only want to know recorded movements, so recorded plant material movements, for example, that fit within those parameters. And so then you reduce it from 300 odd properties to 5 properties, and you reduce it from 2,000 odd movements to 5 movements. And so now you're looking at a very different way of prioritizing your response. And so you might say, let's say that we picked up that the plant material movement that, brought the budwood to that property came through this, which is the Zespri Cool Store, but we identified through their records that it had actually come from this property in the Waikato. So we'd started looking over at this property in Te Puke, but as we've said throughout that last exercise, that may not be the origin property of the disease. So let's say we want to pick up this property as well, and you can just click on a site and add it to the trace and then rerun the trace and see how does that then change how things connect. So if we add that property in and rerun the trace, this is still just looking at plant material movements as well. So you could start to drill down into, if you wanted to look at things like passive tracking of vehicles or bin movements or something. But say we're just looking at plant material movements now. You can see it's gone up from 5 properties to 15 by including that property in the Waikato. And now you're starting to see that there's a little hub here as well of movements around the Waikato. So that might indicate that actually, if that is the source of the budwood, and that budwood was what spread that disease across, maybe you're actually wanting to start your efforts in the Waikato. So we heard a bit of chat about red herrings and stuff earlier on. Like that might have been a bit of a red herring that you first found it on. It might have been actually the end of it, and you want to find where did it start. So that's some of the ways that you can start to use the technology to passively find that stuff. And I think one of the key things that I had heard from Matt through our conversations is to find all of this stuff out, as we identified, it takes a long time, and you have to talk to a lot of people, but also you want to almost be able to know this information without unnecessarily spooking people, and it's quite hard to find this out by talking to people on the phone but not giving away too much detail or not trying to scare them too much. So this is just a nice way of saying we know it's here and here. How does that all connect to everything based on how people have moved around the industry or how plant materials move around the industry, and then being able to go and prioritise those properties so you're not having to call too many people and you're being more targeted. That's how the technology works in a nutshell. I don't know if you wanted to give any more colour to that, Matt.
Well, we're going to we'll go into our group exercise shortly, where we'll revisit some of those questions and challenges and see how that helps. But John, did you want to make any comments from a response perspective?
Maybe not a comment. I was just wondering, because you talked about a biosecurity checklist that you can monitor, so you can track who's going on and off properties. So we talked a lot about grafters, etc. So we could track grafters from that property, or at least identify which companies are using without having to go to the orchardist and asking and looking for records?
Yeah, you can drill down into high-risk vectors. I think it's important that when we talk about the privacy and the data security, that we anonymise who or what has done that movement. We'll tell you like what it basically is it a high-risk vector or not? But until there is a response scenario like something like this, where you do actually need to know specifically to be able to contact that person or understand that thing, that's where you can start to understand that a bit more. Yeah, exactly. KVH would be the one that you'd go to around that. But, for these purposes, it's really about what are the high-risk vectors, how can you drill down into those to prioritise surveillance or response. Yeah.
Cool. And presumably in this scenario, you've got Budwood moving into Zespri Cool Store. You could also look to see where else it may have gone from the Cool Store and how that looks.
Yeah, 100%. So you could say, I want to look at the Zespri Cool Store and include that now, and rerun the trace, and then now you're looking at movements, as I think was brought up before, from nurseries. It could go all the way up to Keri and down to even into the South Island, for example. So I think you're not supposed to do that. Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. Yeah. But you might find it is. So having some of the passive data is important, right? Because we did hear before that some people might not tell the truth.
Give us a good lead to follow up on.
That's sure. Right. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So just in terms of understanding the technology before we head into the group discussions, does that make sense? Any questions from the floor just to clarify? Yep. You take that one.
Thank you. Do you have any data or any knowledge of, because obviously this is all dependent on everyone checking in and out every time. Have you got any sort of data on how diligent people are being about that, and can you even capture that?
Yeah, a couple of answers to that. So tracing for sure, the more people that do it, the better. So the closer to 100% you get, the better. With the algorithms that Ryan was showing before about how to prioritise properties based on algorithms that predict how it moves based on its profile and how it spreads in time of year and how the movements happen, that doesn't actually need 100%. You can start to optimise those models around sort of anywhere between 40 to 70%. I think on the other side of things, the reason why we started with the On Orchard app, this became a product after the fact because it was already used so well and we knew we had really good records. And that's just due to the fact that it is primarily for the growers. So like the value was built for the growers. It's an operational tool that knows their visitors, can notify them from anywhere in the world who's coming and going and what they're doing on their site. Ticks health and safety compliance, biosecurity, contractor management, task management. So the people use it not because they have to, because they want to. It's an operational tool for them day to day. And this sort of data is kind of like a happy coincidence that comes out of that, because it's not, we heard in the New South Wales simulation, and it rings true, is that you can't be adding jobs with things like this, you've got to be removing them. So instead of having this extra thing where you need to record stuff, we're trying to include it in a tool that's already used quite widely. Does that answer your question?
A little bit, but it's not just the owners. It's not just the owners, it's all the contractors as well.
Yep.
And all of the individuals in that team,
yep,
presumably have to be recorded, and where their utes went next and where their utes came from.
Yep.
There must be quite a bit of fuzziness in there.
Yeah, so we have an automated capture at the moment. So that was released recently, where actually when they cross the boundary, it will keep a record that that person has come on site or left before they even check in and out. You get a bit more data as they do check in. You can get some more richer records, but we do have a way of passively capturing those movements. Plus, you can have those other passive trackers like fruit bins and things like that as well.
That's if they've got the app on their phone, I presume.
Yep.
If they haven't got the app on their phone, you can't record it.
So you can...
Sorry, I'm being really...
No, you're right. So we did think about this. You can manually record plant material movements still, and we can upload those into the system. So it's not obviously as quick and efficient, because if it's already in there, then that's a bit easier. But we can manually upload movement records into the system as well.
Okay. Yeah, this is a theme that came up a lot with the pathway plan consultation as well, just around keeping traceability records. And any data is better than no data. And let's start with the high-risk movements, the plant material, in particular nursery plants. Those move the greatest risk, then followed by budwood, pollen, etc. So a cascade of risk. I don't want to dilute our panel discussion too much and give away all the answers, but I'll take one more question.
So probably my question was pretty much the same in a way. this app or this software helps to do the traceback faster. Like it'll just pull everything straight away on the screen. That means a person, whoever is doing the traceback, hasn't need to, or there's no requirement to go him to do such a big paperwork or documentation jobs. It's there. But the accuracy of the data, like making sure the person or the plant material has gone from A to B or A to Z, how are we making sure that that is getting entered accurately is where I was going as well. So, I mean, if that's not happening, that's what we did here is not as useful as we believe it is. So what is it that we're doing to mandate that it happens, that the data goes to the app every time? Or is there any sort of like penalties to the person? Oh, you haven't done that? I don't know. So because this is we know why is it crucial. And what is it that we're doing from that perspective is my question.
I'll give a KVH perspective first. So we as an organisation are trying to build our biosecurity baseline year on year, and the start is let's get the industry keeping records for the high risk movements. We're certainly not punishing for inaccuracies, but what we're trying to do is provide tools to make keeping accurate, timely data easier. This certainly helps with that. And then also get the message and communicate how it's not a compliance activity, it's protecting your investment, protecting your livelihood, and we all benefit from doing this together by showcasing that, hey, if we do have a response, this is the sort of information that's going to help out. So I just want to go into our group discussions before we lose time again. So what we're going to do now is just revisit some of those discussions that you had working through those 4 questions, and in particular some of those challenges that were surfacing. We're going to have a shorter time frame for this. I've left my run sheet on the table, rookie mistake, but I think it's 20 minutes, and just go through how does this technology or keeping records in a digital format, such as with this tool, how will it help to overcome some of those challenges that we've been talking about before, and we'll go through it then. Thanks. Sorry, key point. On your tables you have post-it notes. If you have a common theme coming up that we want to put on the parking lot, I'll come through and gather those. So it might be, for example, you know, what if all data is not being captured? Is it still going to be effective? Some of those themes, please put it on a post-it note. I'll put it on the parking lot. Thanks. Let's just quickly have a volunteer. So to go through, how does, we talked about the challenges in the first session. It can be just overall, we don't have to do it question by question, but generally overall challenges and what difference does this make, or what questions arose? So I'll go to my front table. Thank you, Sonia. Oh, you got your hand up? Okay.
Oh, damn.
Thank you, Anthony.
Jesus, thanks, Brad. Hey, look, it's amazing what a kind of an hour can change your whole thinking, really, can't it? So obviously we talked about how we can incorporate data sets, so standardising data sets, ease of compliance, accuracy and timely, one system, a PAN industry usage or an ID, so obviously how you then kind of verify that data, so we would still consider having fallback of those face-to-face kind of interviews to make sure that the data was verified. Some of the risks, we went into the risks section too, and it's just around data privacy, perceived or real. I know you did talk about that, Ryan, so that's good. And also future alternative systems, just around compatibility of those, making sure that if there is another system, it can actually feed in somehow, some way. But we didn't want too much fragmented data sets either, so in a nutshell.
Cool, thanks Anthony. Any comments from you, John? No?
Just wanted to query, because you said that you still wanted to have follow-ups after the data. So I guess we talked a bit about the resource intensiveness of that. So is there any way that we can use the data to lessen the resource intensive or spread it out over a long time? I was just wondering about, one, why you want to have follow-ups, but then how would you manage that? Well, I know why you want to have follow-ups. How would you manage the follow-ups, I guess?
How you do it, I'm sure there is a system that you can build, whether that's something that's ongoing as you run the system through. So you could say build just a feedback loop into it. I'm not sure if that's something that could happen. The other one, if you do go into a response, again, you just want to make sure that the data sets are actually true and meaningful. So is that a short exercise where you can kind of jump in? Maybe there's some points within the data sets which could put up flags, and you can just go and test those.
So maybe manually just doing a bit of a data check just to say a small subset or whatever. Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. So the data insights manager part of me got very excited about this. So first of all, we've got an electronic database with a consistent framework for entering data. So you'd hope that you get more kind of consistent data and also accuracy of data, hopefully, because you're not relying on memory and possibly people being put on the spot and saying what they think you want to hear. Hopefully with that electronic database, you get a level of ability to interrogate the data and pull out trends. And something we really liked about what we saw on screen was the visualization of those patterns. Most of us think in pictures better than words, and so having that very visual picture can also help you deal with some of those red herrings. And then the final point was with the electronic database, having the opportunity to do metadata analysis. And these things are very seldom simple and straightforward connection, and metadata analysis allows us to dig down into those complex relationships and find trends.
Yeah, good stuff. I just want to pick up on the comment made over here about being able to verify the data. The reality is the system now gives you the opportunity to do that, not when Rome's burning, but at a time outside of that. There's no reason why you can't run the system now and go, I need to go and verify the data set when we're in readiness, not in response. So I love the system. I think it's so cool.
One of the big things for me is, and it came out from the first exercise, is the timelines for the traceback. We're approaching growers and contractors, and are we asking 6 months, 2 weeks ago, a year ago, not understanding fully the epidemiology of the disease. So a system like this gives you far more opportunity to look at timelines beyond what you could through a manual system and give you those options.
So it sounds to me like the next response when we have something like this, we're going to have to get a big team of data analytics experts just sitting there chaining out insights to try and help the governance people actually make decisions.
I was just going to mention as well, back to your point about validating the data and back to the original PowerPoint that was shown by, I can't remember his name, but the CEO of Onside. Sorry, mate. But one of the big slides was those super blockers, right? So you might have a whole heap of data, but you can prioritize as well what you verify and how, and use that as a prioritization tool as well.
Yeah, good point, thank you. Yes, down here.
So kia ora, Ryan. No offence, but this is a commercial product. We're talking about the system. There are competitors to Onside out there that are being... we have Onside at where I work, and I work at Toiho Mai, so I've chosen Onside because, by my awareness, it is the one that's most commonly used on orchards, but certainly it's not just orchards that these diseases can come from for starters, so Farm IQ would be another major source of data, and if we don't incorporate that data into your data, we could still be doing the red herring thing when we go and find this place in Tekowhata or wherever it was. What plans or what systems have you got in place to integrate data from all of the competitors in this farm movements app field? And is there actually some sort of commercial issue with pushing just one app against all its competitors.
Yeah, thanks. And that might be something that we want to pick up with the panel as well. But certainly the requirement is only that traceability data is kept, and it can be kept in any form in terms of the legal requirement under the pathway plan. If growers choose to use a notebook or an Excel sheet, it certainly meets the KVH requirements, but it makes life a lot more difficult. This is one such digital tool that can make it easier, and if others want to work with us, we're certainly open to that as well. We're also having the conversation, and it has come up on a few tables, that many responses aren't just dealing with kiwifruit alone, and how do we actually work with other industries to use that, get that same consistent data across multiple sectors so that we can be tracing risk goods in a same and consistent way. So that's something that we're looking at as well. Thank you. Other points? Linda, yes? Or Barry?
Oh. Well, the way I understand it, if you've got 2,000 growers using Onside, we'd be silly not to use it as in a response. But if there's other tools out there we can use as well, we should integrate it. One of the challenges that I see when you've got a situation like the simulation here is how far do you go to lock down the Bay of Plenty, Tipoki, the Bay of Plenty, North Island, etc.? And what I see with the sort of information that we're getting from tools like Onside is we can make more informed decisions because we know there has been risk movements to Kerikeri, or there's been no risk movements to Kerikeri or to Gisborne, etc. So we can make more informed decisions regarding what we need to be doing now, rather than holding off and waiting for 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get that information about what sort of lockdown's required. So I think that is an absolute plus here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Barry. John, do you want to talk to that from a response perspective?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about movement control previously, and the way we usually do it is we have ground zero, we have a known area, and we work from there out. So we'll lock that area down as we're trying to understand what's happening within that area, and then looking outside that area. And then what happens, we find another area and we lock that down. And then we find another area a bit later on and we lock that down. And then this thing turns up and we lock. So you end up getting this patchwork over time. So I think one of the things that I see from this is absolutely prioritising your targeted follow-ups, your tracing. So yeah, in this particular case, chances are, talking with KVH, we probably would have locked down Te Puke or a large chunk of it, because try and stop that movement. But then we would go to, we've got a target in Hamilton, the cool store. We've got a target in Gisborne. We can get out there and have a look, and we can make a rapid decision on whether, from what we saw getting out there, do we need to lock that down until we understand the situation in Gisborne or Hamilton. So it gives us a chance to get ahead of the curve instead of slowly piecemealing, cutting off a little bit of your leg each time, trying to get ahead of the disease. Make sense? Yeah.
Any other comments? One over here.
So just a thought, you know, how we are making all of these plans in place for a case if it happens in real, right? So the question is, at this place, do we have procedure or processes in place at the orchard to say if we got a truck load of, say, wines or anything that has gone to the orchard and have got those fungal growth on the tires and it's going to the other orchard now, to protect that? So with this, if we have that in place, we can say, okay, we got an issue at one orchard, because we have those procedures in place, it hasn't been contaminating other orchards at the same time?
Sure. So I think I understand the question is it really relates to the level of on-orchard biosecurity that's in place across the industry. And we certainly advocate for an increased level, and higher is always better. but we're not mandating for absolute levels because there's a balance to be had between risk management and producing fruit and costs. So the actual rules that are in place in the pathway plan are around those high-risk goods, such as plant material movements. There are specific requirements if you're moving budwood or rootstock. Those are the highest risks, and that's where the focus of the requirements is. Certainly, if something was to come along and we needed an increased level, there is the ability to do that across other risk goods, but it's getting that balance between pragmatism and risk management. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yep.
Don't we think they'll be too late by the time we know? Okay, it's here now, and now we need to look into the contractors as well.
So absolutely, that if I was a grower, I would have a high level of on-orchard biosecurity practices at my orchard. Yes. I think we're going to move into. Oh, sorry, Linda. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. One more question from Linda.
It's okay to get gazumped by your previous CEO. As a question to the Onside, is there also a system, like we can see that there's been movements from my orchard, so is the ability for Onside to send an alert forward out to the ones that stuff had gone off my orchard, just like an alert? I know in the PSA, I started monitoring orchards. Quite frankly, there were some people that weren't very interested in monitoring orchards. But if you had that reason that, oh, okay, I had an alert, I'll go and have a quick look. It might be a useful tool.
Oh, sorry, Guy, microphone, please.
I think the overarching answer to that is, yeah, we can do communications through Onside. Yeah, I think that comes back to the sort of comms plan and media plan and making sure you know who you want to talk to and how you want to talk to them first. But for sure, that's part of the app anyway. It alerts you as people come and go and do safety and all that sort of stuff. So it's built for that. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. My facilitation is done, and I'm going to hand back to Dave, and we'll set up for the panel discussion. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you, team. A round of applause for the guys. That was a great exercise. Thank you all for your input and for your effort and activity. Just as we set up for the panel, great question about the fact that, yes, Onside isn't the only horse in the race. The guys have made a great breakthrough, and I think that's fantastic. And I encourage people, even if you have an alternative, you can use the free version of Onside as another way of capturing a bigger data set. There's going to be conversations about integrating data from multiple users. There's only allowed, as you probably all heard before, it's only allowed to be one monopoly in the kiwifruit industry, not too many others, okay? So, and some of them have gone home. I know there's still a couple of supports here. I better be careful. I won't say what I was going to say next. I'm going to invite some panellists up now. Leanne Stewart, CE of KVH, hopefully needs no further introduction, so I haven't got one. Ryan Higgs, Onside CEO, and he's already introduced himself. John Brightwell, he's already introduced himself. But the one person that hasn't been introduced is Ed Massey, GM for Sustainability at New Zealand Wine Growers. He's got a long history of involvement with biosecurity, having previously been their biosecurity manager, and before that worked in the response team at MPI. She's a bit of an incestuous wee city circle, isn't it? In fact, just about everybody on this group's worked somewhere in that part of government, except probably Ryan. You're going to start, or I'm going to start by giving you one question each, and Ed, don't be nervous, it won't be you first. I'm going to start with John, because the question in order is first. We've seen firsthand today how traceability can help in a response. But John, keen to hear from your experience, how important is traceability in a response, and how would a system like this assist in a response? And I think you sort of started answering your own question a minute ago, but add to it.
Right, this thing working? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool. So, traceability, especially for a difficult disease like this, where it's hard to detect, it's hard to find, you don't know where it's gone. it's absolutely critical, because otherwise you won't know what you're dealing with. Okay, so if I had an outbreak of elephants, not so difficult. I can find those, okay? Something like this is really difficult. So the only way you can try and get ahead of that invasion curve, hoping that your labs can test quickly in a timely fashion, and are able to go through the volumes you'll need to get in front of that invasion curve. And that's what it's all about, to try and get in front of where it's got to, so you can stop it going elsewhere. Then you can turn your attention to going back and seeing what you can do to manage it.
Excellent, thank you. Ed, your turn now. Today has been an exercise focused on the kiwifruit industry. Can we please start about hearing a New Zealand wine grower's perspective about the importance of traceability data and what you're doing as an industry to collect that sort of data yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Look, traceability is incredibly important for biosecurity, and how the wine industry is dealing with it. You know, it would be fair to say that it's evolving. It's come from a place where we've had something called the New Zealand Wine Growers Grafted Grapevine Standard, and what that has done has essentially, to meet a standard, nurseries have to have full traceability forward and back. Yeah, so we see plant risk or the movement of plant material is the highest risk. So we've mandated that through the GGS for our nurseries. There's now only a small number of nursery providers, but they do have broad coverage across our industry. So that's why we've concentrated on it that way. And as an industry organisation, we have collected something called the Vineyard Register, which essentially tracks the commercial plantation right across the country by variety and where it's planted. And so if you are a member of our sustainability certification program, SWINS, or Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, that's part of the terms of reference, or terms of conditions of entering, is that you enter that data into the Vineyard Register. So we've got a good understanding of what plants are going where from the nursery and what plants are planted where through the Vineyard Register. However, as we've seen through the experience of what has happened in the kiwifruit industry in the last decade or more, we have been around a long time actually, that's probably not enough. And I think there is certainly, we have really started to engage with this Onside, the potential of that technological innovation to drive traceability. We've been in a pilot with the team for the last 12 months or a little bit more, and just yesterday in front of one of our board subcommittees, we're looking to take that further by working with both the Crown and other industry organisations who see benefit in it through using the GIA potentially as a tool to see if we can do something collaboratively to improve that traceability and hence the biosecurity risk management. And I think just finally I want to endorse what Barry was saying. What this does, the key benefit for growers is that the liability of the total response cost that you'd need to pay back through GIA is potentially reduced because you've got more sensitive surveillance equipment, which means you can identify risk faster and deal with it more quickly. It's pretty simple.
Great thought there. Thanks, Ed. I know I was going to ask you at Leanne because I saw you hugging the microphone, so we'll go to you first and then I'll come to Ryan. Growers are faced with a number of challenges. Is keeping traceability data just more compliance with benefits that might not ever be realised?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, well, you did get it before you sat down, so there you go.
Yeah. So KVH doesn't create any compliance that's not necessary. We do put some rules in place to manage risk, to help protect the kiwifruit industry, which I think we're justified in doing that. We've done that under the PSA plan in the past, and we now do it under the National Kiwifruit Pathway Management Plan. So some of those rules are around keeping records of movement of plant materials. As Ed mentioned, the movement of plant material is one of the highest risk pathways because it potentially could move disease around the industry. So that's why we need to have records in place. So when something does happen, we can trace forward, trace back, and we know to where to focus our risk interventions and to make informed decisions. So having these rules and keeping records means that you not only meet the requirements of the pathway plan, you also meet the requirements of your gap audit. But another great thing and a benefit for a grower is knowing what inputs have come onto your orchard, especially if they have risk associated with them, means that you know what's happening on your orchard. You can protect your asset in an informed way. So you'll each have an on-orchard biosecurity plan, which is also a requirement of the pathway plan. You track your inputs, you'll know where plant material has come in, when it has, you'll know where it's gone on your orchard, if it's been grafted, for example, so then you can keep track of that plant health as well. So I think it's a win-win, and it protects not only a kiwifruit grower's orchard, but the industry as well.
Great, thank you. And to Ed's point, it also hopefully will save us money should we get a response. The rapid use of that data, at the moment, a response costs us millions and millions of dollars. If we can shorten up timeframes at the front end, we'll save ourselves a pile of our nest eggs that we've got put aside for responses. Ryan, last question in the first round for you. This tool has been picked up by the Australian wine industry also. Can you share their experience with it and any feedback that you have received from other industries around its use?
Yeah, so we worked with the New South Wales government in partnership with the viticulture sector to do something similar to what we've done today with KVH. I think what we did there was we stood it up without a big grower base to start with. So part of it was around introducing the application to the growers, and then collecting the information for a period of time, and then doing the simulation to model how you might respond or how you might get ready. I think the key thing that we learn, and we learn in any sector, is that in order to get the data, you have to provide an application that has just broad operational value. If it doesn't have value, people won't use it. If it's painful to use, people won't use it. And so, the operational value, or dealing with like sustainability requirements or compliance or those sorts of things, making that stuff easier is what allows you to have an engaged user base, and then that gives you the opportunity to, have the database there to do this sort of stuff. So I think that's the key thing that we always learn. Also, just a point on the integrating lots of different data sources. I mean, these days, that's not technically that hard. It's more of a, that's easy to do. So, and we've done that a bunch with, we did it in the livestock sector with trucks. So we connected into GPS units. We've just done it in the viticulture sector with grape bins. So technically that's not hard, and I think, and we're very open to pulling in different data sources. So I think it's going to be an important part of the puzzle to make sure that you've got broad coverage.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you. Right, now's your opportunity, guys. Hands in the air if you've got a question for these guys. Make Leanne's one really hard. You knew I'd pick on you. Barry, here we go.
Question to the panel: how do we get more growers to activate the permissions to use the data for traceability than what the current situation is? So how do we get them to agree?
Who wants to go first?
So at the moment we've got about 25% of kiwifruit orchards that are currently using the traceability functionality, but we think it's quite a bit higher for health and safety. So I think that we've got a massive advantage there, that a lot of orchardists are already familiar with the app because they're using it for health and safety. It's just helping them understand the value proposition of also using the biosecurity functionality as well. There's been a massive amount of comms from the Onside team out to growers to say, hey, this is available, this is how it works, do you have any questions, do you need any support? We've also provided a lot of information when KVH has been out and about this tool as an option for traceability, making it really clear that we're not enforcing something, this is just a really easy option for meeting the pathway plan and gap requirements. So I think it's just continuing that awareness and the education around the tool, highlighting, the value that we get back, especially around those lower response costs, which is, then lower impact to the industry, lower impact to a single grower as well.
Yep. And Barry, you and I both know that we met the lovely Lucy at our table, and she's going to train you and me how to turn our app on properly. Yep. So if anybody else wants to join that little training session, you're welcome.
Just following up what Leanne said, I think Onside has got good coverage, particularly in Marlborough, for using the health and safety app. I think it probably already meets the level where the algorithm would be effective. So they've done a great job marketing their tool there. And I think now that we've got some direction from our board, we can now start working out more effective communications about what it means from a biosecurity perspective and how it can benefit people. Because I think it's the key challenge with any industry organisation, no matter what it's doing, is to keep their audience engaged and to tell the story of how it's going to benefit their members. And we haven't started that to any great degree, but it's our next challenge.
Great. We're not wanting to cut everybody. Oh, yep, where you go, Ryan.
Just a quick point. So just for context too, I think, we stood this technology up in partnership with KVH very quickly. Like I think we launched in December or something like that. So it's only a very short period of time that it's actually been live, and to have 25%, I think it's incredible. Yeah. I think the industry's done an amazing job. Yeah, 15 months, yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yep. Absolutely. Another question from the floor. Wait, where we go? Here we go. Over here. You won't need to go for a run tonight.
Obviously, we've got some quite complex farm systems out there, and KVH and wine are two probably the more secure and very vertical systems. What about those more complex ones, which are involving multiple crops and systems like that? Who is the lead, and who owns the data, and where do the boundaries kind of lie, and how would you manage that? And that's probably one for you, Ryan, because you've probably got some good insight out of Australia.
In terms of who owns the data, I mean, our policy is that the grower always owns the data, or the farmer. So it sits with them, and we don't do anything with the data unless there's permission. So, that's the way we view it, and that's our policy. In terms of complex systems, I mean, it's quite similar in things like the arable world, where they've got lots of different crops on rotation. Those sorts of scenarios you see both across New Zealand and Australia. I mean, what we've introduced to manage some of that and get more granularity in the data is being able to map individual blocks and have a record of what's going on in those blocks and size and those sorts of things. And then something we're introducing, I think this year, is to be able to check into an actual block rather than a property. So you can actually start to get more granularity. And then also more granularity around, the purpose of the visit. So whether it's harvesting or pruning, or, it's just a banker coming to talk, around the kitchen table. So, that allows us to sort of pull the risk apart a bit more.
Still got to watch those bankers. Who wants to ask the next question? Okay, right, we're going to go to the parking lot while you're thinking of your next question. Or maybe, okay, yep.
Here's one. Can KVH access the data in a biosecurity response?
The answer is yes, if you've decided to give us permission when you've turned on the functionality. We'll access the dashboard that you saw Guy show on the screen during his demonstration, and that'll help us understand where are the highest risk areas that we need to focus on, and that's when we'll target our risk interventions.
Okay, I have another one here around how do we get others on board who might be presenting a risk, so whether it's other sectors or other areas of the sector, such as nurseries.